I was hemorrhaging in the delivery room, without documents, without my phone, without anyone because my husband had gone home drunk and fallen asleep with my things in the car. But that wasn't the hardest day of my marriage. It wasn't even the day I finally decided to leave. My name is Madison Harper. I'm 31 years old, and it took me 15 years to understand that the problem was never that I wasn't Christian enough. It was that he was a cocaine addict who cheated on me while I raised our 3 children alone. But let's go back to the beginning, to the day when everything seemed possible, to the moment when I still believed in happy endings and in love that transforms. I was 15 years old and at a church event in Austin, Texas. It was one of those summer nights where the air is warm and full of promises. Live music, young people laughing, that sense of community you only find in these places. The smell of barbecue mixed with cheap perfume. Christmas lights hanging in the trees even though it was in December. That energy that something good could happen at any moment. And that's when he walked past me, Tyler Jennings, 5 years older, with that smile that seemed to hide interesting secrets. He wore a simple white t-shirt and faded jeans, nothing special. But there was something in the way he moved, confident, but not arrogant, like he knew exactly who he was and wasn't apologizing for it. And me, who spent my whole life apologizing for existing, found that magnetic. I already knew him by sight. He was from the same church my family attended, although he rarely showed up for Sunday services. But that night, he was there. He stopped, talked to me and my friend Whitney, and there was something about him that pulled me like a magnet. Maybe it was the confident way he spoke, looking directly into my eyes as if I were the only person in the world at that moment. Or maybe it was just the fact that someone was actually paying attention to me. Someone saw me. Someone thought I was worth it, because attention was something I didn't have at home. My mother, Diane, had left when I was 12 years old. I still remember the day. It was a Saturday morning, and she called me and my siblings into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, didn't even bother to sit properly, and said, with the same tone you'd use to say you're going to the grocery store, "I met someone else. I'm leaving. You're staying with your father," just like that. No tears, no explanation, no "I'm sorry" or "I love you." Just, "I'm going." "You're staying?" She got up, went to the bedroom, packed her bag, and walked out the front door. I stood there, frozen on the couch, with my 2 younger siblings looking at me as if I had answers. But I was 12 years old. What answers could I have? I only knew that my mother had chosen a man instead of us, and that, somehow, it was my fault. My father, Bob, never recovered from that. He'd always been rigid, one of those old-school men who think emotion is weakness. Ex-military, construction worker, calloused hands, and a permanently serious expression. But after my mother left, he got worse. Much worse. He forbade everything. I couldn't sit on the porch at night, he said. That was something girls who want attention do. Couldn't go out with friends. You'll end up just like your mother. Had to be home, in bed, by 9 o'clock. Every night. Weekends included. He looked at me as if I were an accomplice in my mother's betrayal, as if I had known everything and hadn't told him. And maybe I did know. I was always with her, went everywhere with her. I was the oldest daughter, the involuntary So when she left, my father blamed me. He took his pain out on me, sometimes with words, "You're just like her. You'll destroy some man too." Sometimes with silences that hurt more than screams, entire days without speaking to me, ignoring my existence. And sometimes, when the anger was too much, with a closed fist, never in the face, always where clothes would hide it. So when Tyler showed up that summer night, paying attention to me, making me feel, Sinai clung to that like someone grabbing a plank in the middle of the ocean. He was older, experienced, had a life that seemed different from mine. He worked, had his own money, went out when he wanted, and he wanted me. Or at least, that's what I thought. That's what I needed to believe. We started talking, nothing official at first, Just conversations when we'd see each other at church events. He always had an excuse to walk by me, to exchange a few words. Asked about my school, about my plans, about what I liked to do, and me. I drank in every word like it was water in the desert. For the first time in my life, someone made me feel special. Not the abandoned daughter, not the girl whose father controlled and despised her. Just Madison, just me. A girl who maybe, just maybe, deserved to be loved. I remember spending hours imagining our future together. I would be different from my mother. I would stay. I would be faithful. I would build a real family, and he would be different from my father, gentle, present, loving. We'd have a house with a yard, children who would grow up with parents who loved each other, family dinners, weekend trips, everything I never had, everything I desperately wanted. But then, a week after that first meeting, everything fell apart. Someone to this day I don't know who saw us talking and ran to tell my father, and my father exploded in a way I'd never seen before. He grabbed me by the arm so hard it left purple marks for days, shouted that Tyler was trouble, that he was involved with drugs, that the whole church knew he was no good, that I was forbidden to leave the house, that if I disobeyed, he'd throw me out. Literally. "You're going to end up just like your slut mother," he spat in my face. "But it won't be under my roof." He locked me in my room, confiscated my phone back then. I had one of those really basic cell phones, but it was my only connection to the outside world. Said I'd go to school and come back, and other than that, I wouldn't leave that room. And me? I just accepted it. Didn't argue. Still didn't have the courage. I curled up in the corner of the bed and cried silently, because crying out loud only made things worse. But Tyler didn't give up, and that, at that moment, seemed romantic. Seemed like proof that he really cared. A week later, he managed to get my number from Whitney and called me, asked how I was, said he'd missed me. I told him my father had found out, that I was forbidden to go out, that he'd have to come to my house if he wanted to keep seeing me. And Tyler just disappeared. For a whole week, nothing. Not a message, not a sign. And I thought, that's it. It's over. He doesn't want anything to do with me. As soon as it got difficult, he gave up. But then he called again. Said, "I'm going to stop by your house tonight. If you're there, come outside. I want to talk to you." No intention of talking to my father. No plan to do things right, to ask permission, to show he was a serious guy. But he went, and when he showed up at the door, my father, to my surprise, swallowed his anger and allowed it. Let Tyler sit in our living room until 9 at night. After that, he had to leave. I think my father thought it was temporary, that Tyler would get tired soon, that I'd realize it was nothing special, that life would go back to normal. But it didn't. Because I didn't want it to. Because those 3 hours a night with Tyler were the only hours of my day when I didn't feel completely miserable. And that's how it started. Tyler coming to my house, staying a few hours, talking to me. He never smoked in front of me those first few months. Never showed up smelling like anything strange. Never gave any sign of the things everyone whispered about him. He was polite to my father, not friendly, but respectful. Was gentle with me. Brought me flowers from the supermarket sometimes. Cheap flowers, those $5 ones. But to me, they were red roses from a fancy florist. He seemed genuinely interested in me. Asked about my dreams. I wanted to be a teacher back then. Asked about my fears. Made me laugh with stories from his construction job. And me, I was desperate for that. For someone who wanted me there. For someone who chose to stay, even when it got difficult. Because my mother hadn't stayed. My father wished I'd disappear. But Tyler came back, night after night. But my father didn't accept it. Even allowing the visits, he found fault with everything. Started punishing me in increasingly creative and cruel ways. Said I couldn't eat the food he bought. He'd make dinner for himself and my siblings, and I had to stay in my room. Said I wouldn't get a penny of his money. That I didn't deserve anything that came from him while I was acting like a slut. He wanted to force me to break up with Tyler, but the effect was the opposite. The more my father rejected me, the more I clung to Tyler. Because Tyler gave me money for food when I was hungry. Tyler brought me snacks when he came to see me. Tyler was there when my father emotionally expelled me from my own home. Tyler was my salvation. Or at least that's what I thought. I didn't realize at the time, how could I? But I didn't want Tyler. I wanted to get out of that house. I wanted to run away from my father, from the pain, from the constant feeling of being rejected by everyone who was supposed to love me. And Tyler was my way out. My ticket away from there, my only hope for a different life. So when my school friends whispered that he used drugs, that he had a bad reputation in the neighborhood, that I should be careful, I pretended not to hear. When Whitney pulled me aside one day and said, "Maddie, everyone knows he's trouble. You need to be careful," I rolled my eyes and said she was jealous, because accepting that would mean going back to the cage. And I'd rather anything than go back there, until one night, after a few months together, I saw it. I couldn't pretend anymore. We were at a friend's house, first time I'd really gone out since my father had forbidden me. I'd lied, said I was sleeping over at Whitney's. And Tyler took me to this party, and there, in the backyard, he was smoking with a group of guys. Not regular cigarettes, weed. The smell was unmistakable, and there were other things too. Things I pretended not to see. Strange behaviors. He'd disappear into the bathroom and come back different, too agitated, talking too fast, with dilated pupils. Or sometimes the opposite, slow, sluggish, almost passing out, standing up, unexplained disappearances. That paranoid way, looking over his shoulder all the time. But I swallowed it all. I thought, I met him like this. I knew about the rumors. I can't complain now. I knew. And I chose to stay. I rationalized. At least he doesn't use in front of me. At least he tries to hide it. That means he cares, right? That means he'll eventually stop. And it was exactly at that moment, at 16 years old, trying to balance school, an addicted boyfriend I didn't want to admit was addicted, and a father who hated me, that I discovered something that would change everything forever, something that would bind me to Tyler Jennings for the next 15 years of my life. I was latchy. My period should have come 2 weeks ago, but nothing. And I knew, my body knew before I even took the test. My breasts hurt in a different way. I had nausea every morning, and there was that tiredness, not normal tiredness, but that tiredness that feels like someone drained all your vital energy. I was pregnant at 16 years old. Still in my sophomore year of high school, with a boyfriend who disappeared for days at a time, and a father who could barely look at me without disgust. I bought the test at a pharmacy on the other side of town, where nobody knew me. Paid in cash money Tyler had given me for food. Hid the little box at the bottom of my backpack and waited to get home at a time when my father would be at work. Locked the bathroom door. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the test in the toilet. 3 minutes. The box said I had to wait 3 minutes. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and counted every second. 180 seconds that felt like 180 hours. And when I looked to lines, strong, pink, unmistakable, pregnant, I didn't cry immediately. First came the shock, that kind of shock that leaves you kind of numb, as if you were watching your life from outside your own body. I stayed there, sitting on the floor, holding that piece of plastic that had just changed my entire life. And then, slowly, reality began to sink in. And then, yes, I cried. I cried silently, with my hand covering my mouth so I wouldn't make noise until I had no more tears. When I told Tyler, 2 days later, he was silent. We were in his car, parked on a dark street near my house. I'd asked him to pick me up after my father fell asleep. I climbed out the bedroom window, something I'd never done before. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would explode. And when I finally said the words, "Tyler, I'm pregnant," he just stared at the steering wheel. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't panic. It wasn't anger. It was just ... emptiness. As if I'd told him the car had a flat tire. Something annoying, inconvenient, but that he'd have to deal with. He didn't hug me, didn't hold my hand, didn't ask how I was or if I was scared. Just said, after a silence that seemed eternal, We're going to have to figure out what to do about this. Not about the baby, not about our situation. This, as if it were a problem, not a life. Not our lives changing forever, just an inconvenient problem that needed to be solved. And what did we do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because right after that, my mother, who had returned to Austin after months living who knows where with her new husband, offered me an apartment. She called out of nowhere on a Sunday afternoon. Didn't even ask how I was. Just said, "Madison, I'm traveling again with Richard. I'm going to leave my apartment empty for a few months. You can stay there if you want. I'll leave the rent paid until December. After that, you're on your own." Those were exactly her words. You're on your own. My mother, who abandoned me at 12, now offered me temporary shelter and no emotional support. No questions about why I'd need to leave my father's house. No concern, just a practical and cold offer. But I accepted. Of course I accepted, because the alternative was telling my father I was pregnant. And I knew deep in my soul that if he found out, he'd kill me. Literally or figuratively, I didn't know. But I didn't want to find out. So I left home. Told my father I was going to live with my mother because we were reconnecting. He shrugged, didn't even try to stop me. I think he was relieved to get rid of me. I took my clothes, my school books, and left alone. 2 months pregnant at 16 years old, to my mother's apartment in an old building in East Austin. Tyler would visit me on weekends, but during the week I was completely alone. I'd stopped going to school because the shame was too great. Pregnant teenagers weren't as common in 2010 as they are today. The few who got pregnant were whispered about, pointed at, judged. I couldn't face that, couldn't sit in a classroom and pretend my life wasn't falling apart, so I just stopped going. I spent my days doing manual work, little gigs to make some money, made beaded bracelets and sold them online, sewed baby clothes I ironically liked to sell at craft fairs, anything to have some money of my own, because I knew I couldn't depend on anyone. Tyler worked in construction, but his money disappeared fast. There was always something, always an emergency. The car broke down, the boss delayed payment, a friend needed help. I didn't understand where the money was going, but I suspected it went to alcohol, drugs, 2 things he didn't tell me about. But I didn't ask, because asking meant having to face answers I didn't want to hear. And the weekends, he'd disappear. Simple as that. Friday night, he'd say he was going out with friends just for a few hours. "Baby, I'll be right back," and disappear until Sunday night. Sometimes Monday. And I'd be there, pregnant, alone in that apartment that smelled like mold, calling his cell phone until the battery died. He never answered. Never. And when he came back, he'd act like nothing had happened, like it was completely normal to leave your pregnant 16-year-old girlfriend alone the entire weekend. I'd fight, cry, scream, pound his chest with my small fists while tears streamed down my face. "Where were you? Why didn't you answer? Do you know how worried I was? What if something happened to me? What if I needed you?" But he always had an excuse. I was working overtime. My phone died and I forgot the charger. "You're too controlling, Madison. Can't I have my friends?" And somehow, he always managed to turn the tables. Somehow, the blame always ended up being mine. I was too dramatic, too clingy, too jealous, too demanding, and I'd end up apologizing. Me? Pregnant at 16 and abandoned every weekend, apologizing for being too needy, for needing too much, for expecting the father of my child to be present. And then, when I was 6 months pregnant, my mother called me, straight to the point. As always, "Madison, I can't pay the apartment rent anymore. Richard got a good job in Houston. We're moving there. You're going to have to figure it out. There's 1 more month paid, then you decide what to do." Going back to my father's house wasn't an option. He still didn't know about the pregnancy, and I was visibly pregnant now. No way to hide it anymore. I could try to rent something on my own, but with what money? I made maybe $200 a month with my gigs. Wasn't even enough for a security deposit on a crappy place, so I did the only thing that seemed possible. I moved in with Tyler. It wasn't a romantic decision. It wasn't him saying, "Come build a life with me. Let's raise our child together." It was pure necessity, desperation, lack of options. I had nowhere to go, and he had a room at his mother Barbara's house. I remember the day I moved. Tyler showed up with a borrowed pickup truck. We put my few things in the bed, 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books, my craft materials. Everything I had in the world fit in a pickup truck. I was 17 years old and 6 months pregnant. And as we drove to Barbara's house, I looked out the window and thought, how did I get here? How did my life become this? The house was small, in a working-class neighborhood in Austin. Tyler's room was in the back, accessed by a separate entrance, practically a tiny studio attached to the main house. 1 room, 1 bathroom, a mini kitchen that was more like a cabinet with a stove. The walls were thin. You could hear everything that happened in the main house. And that's where I moved, 6 months pregnant, with a suitcase of clothes that no longer fit and no prospects for the future. Barbara didn't want me there. She made that clear from day one. Not with words, she was too polite for that, but with looks, with silences, with that way of talking to me as if I were a temporary intruder, not the mother of her grandson. She thought her son deserved someone better, someone who still went to church every Sunday, someone who would save him from drugs and alcohol. And me, in her view, I wasn't that person. I was the girl who had gotten her troubled son pregnant. I was the problem, not the solution. Another weight he had to carry, but Barbara was all I had. Because when Jake was born, 3 months later, she was the one who took me to the hospital. Tyler was working, or at least that's what he said, called saying he couldn't leave, that he'd lose his job, that I'd understand. And when it was time for labor, Barbara held my hand. Barbara stayed with me through 14 hours of labor. Barbara did the role that my child's father should have done. And me? I was grateful. Pathetically, desperately grateful for crumbs of care. Because it was more than my own mother had done. More than Tyler did. So I swallowed the disapproving looks, the passive-aggressive comments about how I should raise my child, the suggestions that I should get Tyler back to church, because she was there. And in my distorted mind, that had to mean something. After Jake was born, everything got worse. Much worse. Tyler worked during the week. When he worked, he missed a lot, always had some excuse, would get home around noon, sleep until late afternoon, and on weekends, disappear. Friday night, he'd leave work and go straight somewhere bar. Friend's house, I never knew for sure. And would come back Sunday or Monday, drunk, high, with red eyes and that smell I'd learned to recognize. Old sweat, beer, weed, and something chemical I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn, and I was left alone with a newborn baby, without a support network, without family, without friends, because I'd distanced myself from everyone out of shame. My father didn't know anything. He still thought I was living with my mother, reconciling with the family. My mother was in Houston and couldn't care less. So I managed, woke up in the middle of the night alone, changed diapers alone, breastfed alone while crying from exhaustion and loneliness. And when Jake had a febrile seizure at only 4 months old, in the middle of the night on a Saturday, I called Tyler 47 times. I counted 47 times. He didn't answer any of them. Not one. Jake was shaking in my arms. His temperature was so high I could feel the heat through his little outfit. I was terrified, certain my baby was going to die. And Tyler was at some bar, too drunk or too high to answer the phone. I had to knock on Barbara's door at 3 in the morning. She took me to the hospital, stayed with me while doctors examined Jake, held my hand while I cried uncontrollably in the waiting room. And when Tyler finally showed up, Sunday afternoon more than 12 hours later, he just shrugged. Sorry, I didn't hear the phone. It was too loud where I was. As if it were nothing. As if his son hadn't almost died while he was drunk somewhere. And you know what I did? I forgave him. Of course I forgave him, because in my head, he was going to change. He was young, only 22 years old, immature. When he matured, when he realized he had a real family, real responsibilities, he would change. He had to change. Because the alternative, accepting that I was trapped with an addict who didn't give a damn about me or his son, was impossible to face. So I continued accepting the weekends alone. Continued justifying the disappearances, continued believing that one day, somehow, miraculously, things would get better, because I needed to believe that, because without that hope, I had absolutely nothing. And with a baby in my arms, no money, no complete education, no family, no friends, I really had nothing. But then something happened that forced me to face the truth in a way I could no longer ignore, not even with all my capacity for self. Jake was a year and a half old when I needed to switch my birth control. The pill I was taking was causing side effects, horrible headaches, irregular bleeding. The doctor suggested switching to a different brand. I had just managed to go back to studying at night, trying to finish the high school I'd dropped out of. I was doing junior year, 11th grade, in night classes at Austin Community College. During the day, I took care of Jake. At night, Barbara would stay with him while I went to class. I had started working with children's party decorations on weekends. Nothing big, small birthday parties in backyards, tables decorated with princess and superhero themes. But it was mine. It was something I was building with my own hands. And for the first time since Jake was born, I was breathing. Not well, not deeply, but breathing. Life wasn't good, but it was ... functional. I was rebuilding something, some version of normalcy. And then the birth control failed, or I failed to take it properly during the transition between pills. I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But less than 2 months after switching medication, I was pregnant again. And when I saw those 2 lines on the test for the second time in less than 2 years, collapsed on the bathroom floor and cried until I had no more tears, cried until my throat hurt, until my eyes were so swollen I could barely open them, because I was finally managing to breathe. Finally managing to work, study, have a bit of independence. Jake was growing, becoming less dependent. I was starting to imagine a future where maybe I'd finish school, maybe go to college, maybe have a real career. And now I was going back to square one. Baby in arms again. Sleepless nights again. Total dependence again. Trapped again. And when I told Tyler, his reaction was worse than anything I could imagine. We were in the bedroom. Jake was sleeping in the crib in the corner. It was a Tuesday night. Tyler had gotten home from work a few hours ago. I'd held the news all day, trying to find courage. And when I finally said, "Tyler, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant again," he looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't surprise. It was annoyance. As if I'd done something deliberately to irritate him. "You need to get rid of it," he said, without emotion. Flat, like asking you to take out the trash or wash the dishes. "We can't afford another kid. You're going to have to get rid of it." And he wasn't asking, wasn't suggesting, he was demanding, ordering, as if my body were his property and he had the right to decide. I tried to argue, "Tyler, I don't know if I can do that. It's different now. I already have Jake. I know what it is. I don't know if," but he cut me off. "Madison, don't be dramatic. It's just a procedure. You take some pills, and that's it. We can't have another kid. I can barely pay the bills as it is." He went to the pharmacy the next day, bought pills that supposedly would cause an abortion, misoprostol, obtained who knows how, without a prescription, put the pills in my hand, closed my fingers around them, looked into my eyes and said, "Take this, tonight. I'm going out. When I come back, it'll be over." And me, I took them, with my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the glass of water, with my heart broken, with tears silently streaming down my face. I took those pills because I didn't know what else to do, because Tyler had said we couldn't afford it, because I was terrified of the idea of having two small children alone, because I was 18 years old and couldn't see another way out. I was sick all night, excruciating pain, like someone was twisting my insides, heavy bleeding, nausea so strong I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach, just yellow and bitter bile. Tyler wasn't home. He'd left to give me space to deal with it, as he said. So I stayed alone in that tiny bathroom, with Jake sleeping in the next room, holding onto the sink while waves of pain went through me. At 4 in the morning, the bleeding was so heavy I got scared. I picked up Jake, still asleep, put him in the car seat, and drove to the hospital. Told the doctors I'd had spontaneous bleeding, that I'd woken up like this. They did an ultrasound tests, and then the doctor came back and said, "Miss Harper, the baby is fine. The heartbeat is strong. You had some bleeding, but the pregnancy is continuing." Actually, that moment, I didn't know how to feel. Relief, terror, crushing guilt for having tried, fear of what was to come. Everything at the same time, but mainly one thought that wouldn't leave me. What if the baby is born with problems? What if the medication caused some deformity? What if I damaged my own child? I spent the entire pregnancy terrified, doing ultrasound after ultrasound, asking doctors to check everything twice, 3 times, praying that everything would be okay, carrying a guilt so heavy that some days I could barely breathe under its weight. And Tyler continued the same, drinking, disappearing, not giving a damn, acting as if the pregnancy didn't exist. My second pregnancy was hell. Literally. I worked while pregnant, setting up decorations, carrying tables, inflating balloons, until I was dizzy. Took care of Jake alone, an energetic 2-year-old who didn't understand why mommy was always tired. And still had to put up with Tyler coming home drunk in the early hours and demanding attention from me. Sometimes he wanted sex. I'd say no. I was pregnant, exhausted, working all day. He'd insist, "You never want anything with me anymore. You've changed. You only care about Jake now." As if I were obligated to be sexually available while pregnant and exhausted. And I'd give in. God, I'd give in. Because it was easier to give in than to put up with his tantrum, than to put up with the punishing silence, than to put up with him leaving and disappearing for days as punishment for my refusal. Lily was born in 2013. Healthy, thank God. 10 fingers, 10 toes. No visible problems. I cried with relief when the doctors told me she was perfect, but the birth was lonely again. Barbara took me. Tyler was working. Barbara stayed with me. Barbara held my hand. And Tyler showed up 4 hours later, looking like he hadn't slept much, because he'd spent the night drinking with friends, celebrating his daughter's birth at a bar, instead of being with me at the hospital. But at least he showed up, and in my distorted head, that counted as progress. At least he came. At least he held his daughter for 5 minutes before saying he needed to go take care of some things. At least he existed, even if barely. It was better than nothing, right? Better than raising 2 kids completely alone, right? I convince myself of this every day. With 2 small children, my life became a brutal and relentless routine. Monday through Friday, Tyler worked when he worked 10, would come home around noon, sleep until about 5 in the afternoon. Wake up, smoke weed now, openly. Didn't even care about hiding anymore. Eat something I'd made, and stay in front of the TV until late. So, he wasn't that bad. He was home. Physically present, wasn't hitting me. In my head, that had to count for something. But on weekends, he'd disappear, and I was left alone with 2 babies, Jake, at 2 years old, Lily, newborn, without sleep, without help, without anything. Jake had terrible jealousy fits about the new baby. Lily had colic and would cry for hours on end. And I was there, alone, trying to calm them both at the same time, so exhausted that sometimes I'd sit on the bathroom floor and cry along with them. I started having anxiety attacks, My heart would race out of nowhere, in the middle of the grocery store, in the middle of the night, in the middle of changing a diaper. I couldn't breathe, felt like I was having a heart attack. My hands would go numb, I'd break out in cold sweat, and I was absolutely certain I was going to die. Right there, and my children would be orphans because their father was drunk at some bar, but I couldn't go to the doctor. Didn't have money. Tyler spent everything he earned on drugs and alcohol. Didn't have time. When would I have time with 2 babies? Didn't have anyone to watch the kids, so I just endured it. Breathed deeply when I could and pretended everything was fine. Swallowed the panic attacks, pushed the anxiety under the rug. Kept functioning because stopping wasn't an option. And it was around this time that Tyler had a motorcycle accident. He was coming back from a bar, 3 in the morning on a Saturday. Drunk, obviously. Hit a tree. Hit hard. Lost 70% of the tissue in his right leg. Had to have multiple skin graft surgeries. Spent a year between hospitals, wheelchair, crutches, physical therapy. It was horrible, painful, traumatic. And me. I took care of him. Of course I did. Worked to pay the bills because he wasn't working and his disability insurance barely covered the medications. Took care of 2 small children alone. Carried Lily in my arms and held Jake's hand while visiting Tyler at the hospital. Cleaned his wounds when he was discharged. Took him to physical therapy 3 times a week. Did everything. And you know what I felt? Anger. Pure and incandescent anger that I had to swallow and pretend didn't exist. Because he had caused this. He had drunk until he couldn't walk straight anymore and had gotten on a motorcycle. He had made a choice, and now I was paying the price. I had to leave my children with Barbara, who complained that I was abusing her goodwill too. Go stay with him at the hospital. Had to work double to compensate for the income we lost. Had to be nurse, mother, provider, everything at the same time. And him. He just lay there, complaining about the pain, taking opioid painkillers that made him even more distant and strange, acting like he was an innocent victim of fate, not an idiot who had made terrible decisions. But after the accident, something miraculous happened. Tyler stopped drinking. Completely. Stopped using drugs, at least the hard ones. Still smoked weed for the pain. But cocaine and the rest, he stopped and started going to church with me. For real. Every Sunday. Sang the hymns. Raised his hands in worship. Cried during sermons about redemption and second chances. And I thought, that's it. Now it's happening. This accident was the wake-up call he needed. God allowed this to save him. To save our family. Now, he's going to change for real. Now, everything I endured is going to make sense. Now, we're going to be a real family. Now I'm going to have the husband I always wanted. And it was on this wave of renewed hope, on this blind faith that finally, things were going to work out. That I did the stupidest thing of my entire life. Something I regret to this day. Something that tied me to him in a way that made it even harder to leave later. I convinced Tyler to marry me at the courthouse. It wasn't his idea. It was all mine. The pressure came from all sides at church. The pastor, the older women, even Barbara, everyone said the same thing. Madison, you need to get married for real. In God's eyes, you're living in sin. That's why you have so many problems. God will only bless you when you're truly married. And I believed it. God, how I believed it. I believed that if we got married, God would finally look at me and say, okay, Madison, you did everything right now. You waited, you endured, you forgave. Now I'm going to fix your life. Now I'm going to transform Tyler. Now you're going to be happy. I believed in miracles. I had to believe, because without that belief, what was left? Tyler didn't want to. He made that very clear. Why get married? We've been together for years. We already have 2 kids. A piece of paper isn't going to change anything. This is stupid. But I insisted. Begged. Cried. Used every argument I could think of. It's important to me. It's important to God. Do you want our children to grow up with parents who aren't even really married? Do you want them to be ashamed of us? And he, kind of out of exhaustion, out of pressure from his mother, too, agreed, fine, let's get married then. But nothing fancy, just the courthouse. Just sign the paper. And for me, that was enough. I didn't want a big party anyway. We didn't have money, didn't have many friends to invite. I just wanted the paper, the legitimacy, the official blessing. We set a date at the Travis County Courthouse. Middle of the week, lunch hour, we'd call to witnesses Barbara and a friend of Tyler's. I'd buy a simple dress, white, pretty, nothing fancy, but something that would make me feel special, something that would make that day memorable. But on the wedding day, everything went wrong. Everything. Like the universe was screaming, "Don't do this. This is a mistake. Stop while you still can." But I didn't listen. I was too determined, too hopeful, too desperate to believe that this time would be different. My dress was stolen, literally stolen from my house. I'd hung it in the closet the night before. Beautiful, white, ready. I woke up the morning of the wedding and it was gone. Just gone. The bedroom window was slightly open. Someone had come in during the night and taken just that, just the dress. Nothing else. No jewelry, no electronics, nothing of value. Just the wedding dress. To this day, I don't know who it was. To this day, that haunts me. But at the time, I didn't have time to process it. I had to be at the courthouse in 3 hours. So I called Whitney, desperate, crying. My dress was stolen. I don't have anything to wear. I don't know what to do. She came running with a borrowed dress. It wasn't white. It was beige, and it was too big on me. But it was what we had. I put it on with shaking hands. And then the driver, we'd hired an acquaintance of Tyler's who had offered to take us last minute, half an hour before. Sorry, my car broke down. I won't be able to make it. No suggestion of an alternative. No offer to help. Just, I won't be able to make it. We had to ask someone else in a rush. It was like the universe was sending neon signs. Don't do this. But I didn't listen. I was too focused on the idea that getting married would fix everything, that God would perform a miracle, that the Tyler from church, the sober Tyler, the Tyler who cried during worship, that Tyler was the real one, and everything that came before was just a bad phase. We got married at the courthouse. Officially, Barbara was there, with an expression I couldn't decipher, part satisfaction, part concern. Tyler's friend was late and arrived smelling like beer. Tyler was nervous, sweating, fidgeting with his hands. I was in a borrowed dress that didn't fit right. But when the judge said, "Do you accept?" I said I do with so much conviction, so much hope. And I thought that meant something, that now, finally, things were going to be different. We took some photos outside the courthouse. A guy who was there offered to take them with his cell phone. Shaky photos, poorly framed, but they were our wedding photos. And when I looked at them later, all I could see was my desperately hopeful smile in Tyler's distant eyes, already thinking about where he was going to drink afterward. Less than a month after the wedding, Tyler started smoking again. Started discreet, just once in a while. He'd say, just to relax. But in 2 weeks, he was smoking every day again. Less than 2 months later, he was back to drinking. Just beer, he swore. No hard liquor. I learned my lesson. But beer became vodka, became whiskey, became anything he could get his hands on. And less than 6 months after we got married, Tyler was exactly where he'd always been. Drunk, high, disappearing on weekends, as if the accident had never happened. As if church had never happened. As if the wedding, that paper that was supposed to bless Usman, absolutely nothing. And me, I was destroyed. Because this time I had no more excuses. This time I couldn't say we're not really married. This time I couldn't say when we get married, it'll be different. We had gotten married, we've done everything right in the church's eyes, and still nothing had changed. Not Juan Bichi. So the problem had to be me. Obviously, I wasn't praying enough, wasn't being wife enough, wasn't pleasing God enough, wasn't submitting enough, wasn't forgiving enough, wasn't loving enough, and God was punishing me for all these failures. For me being inadequate, for me not being woman enough to make my husband want to stay home. I stopped eating properly. Food wouldn't go down. My stomach was constantly in knots. Started losing weight rapidly, not that healthy weight loss, but the kind where your ribs start to show and your face gets hollow. People at church would comment, "Madison, you're so thin. What's your secret?" And I'd smile and say, "Oh, running after 2 little kids." When the truth was, I was dying of anxiety inside. At night, I couldn't sleep. Would stay awake until the early hours, waiting for Tyler to come home, calling his cell phone 20, 30, 40 times a night, sending messages, begging him to come back home. "Baby, please, come back. The kids miss you. I miss you. Please. Where are you? Are you okay? Are you in danger? Please answer me." And nothing. Silence. Or sometimes, around 4 a.m., "Stop bothering me, Madison. Am fine." No punctuation. Badly written. Obvious he was altered. And when he finally came back Sunday night or Monday morning, Guy'd make a scene. Scream. Cry. Pound his chest. "How can you do this? How can you leave me alone every weekend? We're married now. You promised. You promised you'd change." And EIM. And he'd go to the bedroom, lock the door, sleep 16 hours straight, and when he woke up, act like nothing had happened. It was around this time that I bought a car for my work. My decoration business was growing slow, but growing. I needed transportation to carry the tables, the balloon arches, the backdrops. Depending on rides was becoming unsustainable. So why, actually, because it was with my money, bought a used SUV. Nothing fancy, but functional. And Tyler, who was out of work on disability after the accident, offered to drive for me. He'd finished physical therapy, was walking normally again. And at first, it seemed good. Seemed like we were working together, being a team, building something. He'd drive to the event location, help me carry things, set up the heavier structures, and I thought, see, he's trying. He's changing. Slowly, but he is. But the reality was different, very different. Tyler drove my car drunk. Literally, he'd drink before picking me up to go to events. Sometimes brought hidden alcohol in the car and drank while driving. I could smell it, could see the red eyes, the slow way of reacting, and I'd beg Tyler, "Please, don't drink when you're going to drive with me, please. We could die. What if we crash? What if the police stop us?" But he always had an excuse. "I only had 2 beers. Fine. You're paranoid." And I'd accept it, because what was my alternative? I didn't know how to drive, didn't have a license ever, had the money or time to get one, so I depended on him, and he knew it and used it against me. And worse, he brought cocaine, used it in the bathrooms at event venues, would come back with glazed eyes, sniffling with that frantic and paranoid energy, talking too fast, moving his jaw, and I had to pretend I wasn't seeing it, had to smile at the clients, had to act like everything was perfectly normal while my husband was high 3 meters away. I lived with shame, constant, suffocating shame, fear that someone would find out, fear that someone would smell the alcohol on him, fear that Tyler would make a scene, say something weird, act in a way that would give away that he was altered. I monitored him like a hawk, stayed between him and the clients, spoke for him, made up excuses. "Oh, he has a bad headache today. He twisted his ankle. He's taking painkillers." And at the same time, I was completely dependent on him. Financially, because although I earned more, he still contributed a little when he was working. Logistically, because I needed someone to drive. Emotionally, because as horrible as it was, he was all I had. He was my family. He was my children's father. He was my husband, officially, in the eyes of God and the law. The weekends continued the same. He'd disappear. I'd be left alone with Jake and Lily. And during the week, when he was home, I walked on eggshells, trying not to irritate him, trying to be the perfect wife, cooking his favorite foods, keeping the kids quiet when he was sleeping, having sex when he wanted, even when I didn't, because refusing meant days of punishing silence and an extra weekend of disappearance as punishment. I was trying to be good enough, submissive enough, loving enough, because if I was good enough, maybe he'd stop. Maybe he'd finally see me. Maybe he'd finally love me. But he didn't love me. And deep down, I always knew that. Deep down, I knew that love doesn't make you disappear for 3 days. Love doesn't make you use drugs in the bathroom while your wife works. Love doesn't make you drive drunk with your family in the car. But I couldn't accept that, because accepting meant admitting I'd wasted years of my life, that I'd had 2 children with a man who never really wanted me, that I'd married someone who didn't love me. And that truth was too big, too heavy, too painful to carry. So I kept pretending, kept praying, kept believing that if I just held on a little longer, one day he'd change. One day God would perform the miracle. One day everything would make sense. One day my suffering would be rewarded. One day, one day, one day. And well, that one day never came. I was dying inside, piece by piece, day after day, until there was almost nothing left of who I was before. And then, when Jake was 4 years old and Lily was 2, in the middle of all this slow and silent destruction, I discovered I was pregnant again. And this Chimie, it wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. I was doomed. Doomed to stay, doomed to suffer. Doomed to never escape. When the test came back positive for the 3rd time, I didn't cry. I just looked at those 2 pink lines and thought, of course, this would happen. Because nothing in my life could be simple. Nothing could be planned. Nothing could be controlled. Everything had to be chaotic, impossible, desperate. It was like the universe was laughing in my face. I told Tyler that same night. We were in the bedroom, Jake and Lily already asleep. He was lying in bed on his phone, always distracted, always somewhere else mentally, even when physically present. I sat on the edge of the bed, held the test in my hand, and said, "Tyler, I'm pregnant again." He looked at me over the phone. Didn't put the phone down completely, just looked over it and said, "Weren't you taking pills? How did this happen?" As if it were my fault. As if I'd gotten pregnant alone, out of pure incompetence. As if he hadn't participated in the process. And the first thought that crossed my mind was, I can't leave now. Now, I have 3 kids. How am I going to leave with 3 kids? Because for the first time in all those years, the real possibility of leaving had crossed my mind, not as a vague daydream, not as an impossible what if, but as something concrete, something I maybe, possibly, could do. I had my work, made my own money, had friends who had offered help. Maybe, just maybe, I could. But now, pregnant again. That door that had opened a crack slammed shut. I was trapped definitively, irreversibly. Because how was I going to take care of 3 kids alone? How was I going to work pregnant and then with a newborn? How was I going to pay rent, food, diapers, daycare? It was impossible. Completely impossible. The pandemic started 2 months later. March 2020, the entire world stopped. Lockdown, quarantine, everything closed. And I thought my work would end. Who was going to have a children's party in the middle of a pandemic? Who would want balloons and decorations when people were dying by the thousands? But the opposite happened. Bizarrely, inexplicably, the opposite. People wanted to celebrate even more, wanted to create memories, wanted to give their children some sense of normalcy in the middle of the chaos. So I worked, pregnant at 6, 7, 8 months, in the middle of a global pandemic. I worked Small parties in backyards, drive-by birthdays where people would drive by and honk, elaborate decorations in front of houses. I did everything. Because I needed the money, because stopping wasn't an option. And Tyler was home all the time now. Because everything had closed. There was nowhere for him to go, or at least that's what I thought. So he stayed there, at my feet, bothering me, demanding attention. Complaining that I didn't spend time with him. Complaining that I only cared about work and the kids, as if I had energy to spare, as if I wasn't pregnant and taking care of 2 small children and working every day. And when he wasn't bothering me, he was using drugs in the house. In front of me, with Jake and Lily, there. He didn't care about hiding anymore, smoked weed in the living room while the kids watched cartoons, snorted cocaine in the bathroom with the door barely closed. And me? I pretended I didn't see, because what else could I do? Fight? He'd ignore me, threaten to leave. I had nowhere to go, especially now, in the middle of a pandemic, pregnant. Mason was born in January 2021, and the birth was the loneliest, most humiliating, most devastating moment of my entire life. It was a Saturday. Tyler had been drinking since Friday night because even in the middle of the pandemic, even with everything closed, he always found a way to drink. Always had a friend with an open garage. Always had a place. The contractions started in the morning. Strong, regular, every 5 minutes. I knew it was time. I called Tyler. He was at someone's house. Baby, it's time. I need to go to the hospital. Can you come get me? It took him half an hour to answer. When he answered, he was clearly drunk. But he said he'd come, and he came. Thank God, he came. He took me to Dell Children's Medical Center, driving kinda crooked, smelling like beer. But he took me. I said, wait here in the reception. I'm going to do the first exams. If I don't need to stay, we'll go back. Should be quick. I gave him my phone, my purse, the documents, everything for him to hold. Stay here. I'll be right back. But when the nurse examined me, she said, honey, you're already 8 centimeters dilated. You're going straight to the delivery room. There's no going back home. And I thought, okay, I'll go out there to get my things from Tyler and we'll go up together. But when I came back to the reception, 5 minutes later, Tyler was gone. The security guard said he'd asked him to move the car, that parking was for employees only. Tyler said okay and left, and never came back. Went home with my phone, with my documents, with the baby bag I prepared so carefully, little outfits, diapers, blankets, with everything. Locked the car in the garage and went to sleep. Drunk, just went to sleep. And me, I went up to the delivery room. Alone, without a phone, without documents, without anyone. The medical team was shocked. Where's your husband? Where are your documents? Who should we call? And I had no answers. I didn't know any phone numbers by heart. Everything was saved in my phone. Didn't know my father's number, Barbara's number, no one's. The social worker came to talk to me, outraged. How can you allow this? How can you let him do this to you? As if it were my choice, as if I'd decided to be there, alone, without anything. And I had no answer. I just cried silently while the contractions came, one after another, tearing my body apart. Mesa was born at 3:27 in the afternoon, and right after, something went very wrong. Hemorrhage, intense. The doctor shouted something I didn't understand. Nurses ran into the room. Someone applied something to my arm. They brought bags of blood. I saw everything kind of blurry, kind of distant, as if I were watching from outside my body. And for a second, a brief and scary second, I thought, I'm going to die here, alone, and you won't even know. And you know what I felt? Relief. A strange, disturbing relief, but relief. Because if I died, at least I wouldn't have to endure anything more. At least the suffering would end. At least I'd have peace. But I didn't die. They managed to stop the hemorrhage. Mason was born, healthy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect, and I survived. But I stayed extra days in the hospital because of the complications. Got so weak I couldn't even sit up by myself. Wheelchair help to go to the bathroom. Everything. And Tyler didn't show up. Not even the next day. I finally managed to remember my father's number, an old number he'd had for years. I called from the hospital phone, told him what had happened. My father went to the house, woke up Tyler, got my things, and he was pissed. More pissed than I'd ever seen him in my life. What kind of man does this? But it didn't change anything. Tyler was like this, and I had chosen to stay, so it was my problem. Barbara came to visit me, brought my things, stayed with me until I was discharged. And me. I was grateful, pathetically grateful, because at least someone was there, at least someone cared enough to show up. Even if it was the mother-in-law who judged me, who thought I wasn't good enough for her son, at least she was there. When I was discharged, I went back home. And life continued, as if nothing had happened. Tyler acted like it had been a misunderstanding. Sorry, baby, I was really tired. I ended up falling asleep. As if sleeping were an excuse for abandoning your wife at the hospital, as if this were normal, acceptable. And me? I swallowed it. Juan Marty Chimi, because what else could I do? In the following months, Tyler got worse. Much worse. He started traveling for war. At least that's what he said. Would disappear for days. A week? 2 weeks. And I was left alone with 3 children, including a newborn. Without sleep, without help, trying to breastfeed and take care of the older kids and work. And I'd find photos on his phone. Photos he'd delete, but they'd stay and recently deleted. Photos of trips, restaurants, women. He wasn't just working. Obviously not. He was having another life. A parallel life. A life where he was single and free and without responsibilities. That's when I discovered the profile. He'd sold the Instagram account of his carpentry business side, helped build that account, had done all the marketing, all the posts, and the company that bought it wanted access. Tyler asked me to recover the password, and in the recovery process, I ended up accessing a new profile he'd created. A personal profile where he was single, no kids, looking for something real, talking to several women, flirting, setting up dates, selling a version of himself that didn't exist, successful, available, free. While I was at home with our 3 children, he was online pretending to be single. And when I saw all those conversations, all those lies, something inside me finally broke completely. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger, it was clarity. Cold, crystalline, and unshakable clarity. I looked at that screen and thought, with absolute certainty, I can't anymore. I literally can't do this anymore. Either I leave or I die. Not metaphorically. Literally. I'm going to die if I stay. He came back from the trip a few days later. I confronted him, showed him the screenshots I'd taken, and he did what he always did, denied, then partially admitted, then cried, then promised to change. Baby, I'm so sorry. I don't know what got into me. I'm lost. I need help, but I love you. I love our kids. Please give me one more chance. And for the first time in my life, for the first time in all those years, I didn't believe him. Not one bit. I looked at him crying and felt ... nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not pity, not anger, not love, nothing. I was empty. Completely empty. And that's when I knew I was done. Not from anger, not from pain. I was simply done. I said to Eam with a calmness that surprised me, Tyler, we need to separate. This isn't working. It never worked. And I can't take it anymore. I waited for him to scream, beg, make a scene, but he just shrugged and said, okay, if that's what you want, you stay in the house until you get organized. I'll leave. And he left. Simple as that. After all those years, after everything, he left without fighting. Because deep down, way deep down, he was relieved. He'd never really wanted me. Never wanted that life. And now he was free. Finally, free and me. I should have been relieved too, but I couldn't leave the house. I'd search for apartments online, see prices, do the math, and always came to the same conclusion. I didn't have enough money. Not for a decent place for me and 3 kids. So I stayed, paralyzed, trapped, not by love, there was no more love, trapped by the cold and cruel logistics of survival. But at least Tyler had left. At least I had the house to myself. At least I didn't have to see him every day. It was something small, but it was something. And for the first time in 15 years, I managed to breathe just a little bit. But I managed, and that small breath gave me hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could really leave someday. But the peace lasted less than a month. Barbara called Tyler. I heard the voicemails. He left his phone unlocked one day when he stopped by to pick up some things, and there she was, her voice saying, "Tyler, you can't let her stay in that house with those kids of hers. That house is yours. Your grandmother left it to you. She has no rights here. And another thing, that 3rd kid, I don't even think he's yours. If I had money, I'd do a DNA test. You need to come back home." Now, when I heard that, something in me awakened. It wasn't anger, it was dignity. A dignity I'd forgotten existed, that I thought I'd lost forever. But it was there, buried under years of abuse and manipulation, and now it resurfaced, fierce and unshakable. I had given 15 years of my life to that family, had raised 3 children practically alone while Tyler drank and used drugs, had endured betrayal, abandonment, humiliation, had almost died in a delivery room alone. And now she had the audacity to question whether Mason was Tyler's son, to tell me I had no right to be there. Tyler came back home the following week, just showed up with his bags and said, "I'm staying. The house is mine. If you want to leave, you leave." And I was trapped, living in the same house as him, trying to avoid him, sleeping in separate rooms. And Mason in one room, Jake and Lily in another, Tyler in the master bedroom. But he didn't accept that. He didn't accept that I was really done. He'd show up in my room in the middle of the night, would say he missed me, that we were married, that I had wifely duties, wanted sex, demanded sex, and when I refused, he'd get aggressive, not physically violent, but that passive-aggressive aggression that makes you feel in danger all the time. Slamming doors, saying things like, "You're going to regret this," standing between me and the room exit, looking at me in a way that made my stomach turn. I'd never felt afraid of him before. In the 15 previous years, I'd felt many things: disappointment, sadness, anger, but never fear. And now I felt it. Real fear. Fear that he'd lose control. Fear of what he might do. So I stopped sleeping at home. Started sleeping at my studio, a small space I rented to store my work materials. Took a mat, a blanket, left the kids with Barbara at night, which she hated, but did because they were her grandkids. And I slept there, on the cold floor, alone, because it was safer than sleeping in the same house as Tyler. It was during this period that I lost 20 pounds in 3 months, not on purpose, not through diet or exercise. My body simply started consuming itself. I had no appetite. Food tasted like cardboard, and when I tried to eat, my stomach would reject it. I'd vomit or get diarrhea. My body was literally disintegrating under the stress. And there were the anxiety attacks, worse than ever. My heart would race out of nowhere. I couldn't breathe, literally. It was like someone had placed a 200-pound weight on my chest. My hands would go numb. I'd break out in cold sweat. I'd see stars. And I was certain, absolutely certain, that I was having a heart attack, that I was going to die, right there. It happened at the grocery store, in the middle of work. Driving, I'd finally gotten my license. out of pure necessity, and I'd have to pull over, put my head on the steering wheel, and try to remember how to breathe. In 4-4, hold 4-4, out 4-4. But it didn't work. Nothing worked. The panic was stronger. And I thought, I'm going to die here, in this house, with this mum, and it'll be my fault for not leaving when I could, because I felt it was my fault, that I'd chosen to stay, that I was weak, pathetic, incapable of doing the simplest thing in the world, leaving. And that's when Brooke showed up again. My friend, my savior, the same one who'd helped me years ago in the first separation attempt. She hadn't seen me in months. I isolated myself from everyone. But she showed up at my studio one day, and when she saw me thin, pale, with deep dark circles, shaken, she started crying. Madison, she said, holding my face in her hands, low-key, me, you're going to die if you stay here. Literally, do you understand? You are going to die. And I knew she was right. I could feel it, could feel my life draining away, could feel that I didn't have much time before something went really wrong, before my heart gave up, or before I did something desperate to end the pain. She gave me money, $1,000, for the first month's rent. You're going to look for an apartment today, and you're getting out of that house before the end of the month. And she made me promise, made me swear. And I promised, but even so, I resisted. I'd search for apartments online, save listings, but never called, never scheduled visits, because leaving meant admitting it was over, that I'd failed, that God wasn't going to perform any miracle, that the 15 years had been a waste. And I didn't want to admit that. Couldn't. And there was the guilt, crushing guilt, because what if Tyler did something drastic? What if he killed himself? What if he sank into drugs and died? It would be my fault. I'd promised in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I'd promised before God, and now I was going to break that promise. God would punish me, would make me pay. My children would suffer because of my choices. So I procrastinated, found excuses. I need to buy furniture first. I need to save more money. I need to leave some things here for Tyler, for the boys to visit. All excuses, all fear. Fear of leaving, fear of staying, fear of living, fear of Dean. Total paralysis. But Brooke didn't give up. She called every day. Did you call the apartments? Did you go see any places? Madison, please. And finally, after weeks, I gave in. Went to see an apartment. A small place in South Austin. 2 bedrooms, one for me and Mason, another for Jake and Lily. Reasonable rent, nothing special. But it was clean, safe, far from Tyler. And I signed the contract, with hands shaking so much I could barely hold the pen. But I signed, paid the deposit with the money Brooke had given me, set the move date 2 weeks later, and then started second-guessing everything. What if I can't pay rent? What if I can't take care of 3 kids alone? What if Tyler needs me and I'm not there? I'd already paid rent a week ago and still hadn't packed, still hadn't told the boys, still hadn't done anything. Until Brooke showed up at my house, unannounced, with a moving truck and 2 of her friends. Today, she said, you're leaving today. I don't care if you're ready. You are going. And she started packing, putting clothes in boxers, taking things out of closets, disassembling Jake and Lily's bed, and I just stood there, paralyzed, watching, until she came, grabbed me by the shoulders, looked into my eyes and said, Madison, breathe. You can do this. You have to do this. And something inside me finally gave in, finally accepted, and I started helping, packing, deciding what to take. And when Tyler came home and saw what was happening, he just stood at the door, without saying anything, without trying to stop me, just watching with that empty expression I knew so well. And I took my children, Jake, Lily, and Mason, put them in the car, put our things in the truck, and when I closed the door of that house for the last time, with our things in the truck and my children in the car, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade. Hope. Small, fragile, scared, hope. But hopey that maybe, just maybe, on the other side of that door, there was a better life. A life where I wasn't afraid, where my children didn't see fights, where I could sleep through the night without waking up in panic. A life worth living. And when I started the car and left that street for the last time, I took a deep breath and, for the first time in years, my chest didn't hurt. Peace. The first thing I felt when I entered that small apartment in South Austin was peace. And it was so strange, so unexpected that I almost didn't recognize it, because I had completely forgotten what it was like not to be constantly tense. Not to be waiting for the next fight. Not to be wondering if he was going to come home or disappear again. Not to be afraid. For the first time in 15 years, I took a deep breath and my chest didn't hurt. My shoulders weren't tense. My jaw wasn't clenched. I was relaxed. And it was so strange, it almost felt wrong. Like I didn't have the right to it, like at any moment everything would fall apart again. But it didn't fall apart. The house was small, much smaller than the previous one. The living room and kitchen were practically the same thing. The bedrooms were tight. There was no backyard, but it was mine. Mine and my children's. No one was going to come home drunk in the middle of the night. No one was going to use drugs in the bathroom. No one was going to yell at me for leaving a dish in the sink. It was just silence. Good silence. Healing silence. The boys adapted scarily fast. Jake and Lily seemed lighter. They didn't say it with words, children rarely do, but I could see it. They slept through the night now, didn't wake up with nightmares, smiled more, laughed more. Jake even started singing in the shower, something he'd never done before. And Lily, my quiet and observant Lily, started talking about feelings. Mommy, I like it here. It's quiet. And Mason, at only 4 years old, didn't even seem to notice much difference. For him, this had always been life, his siblings, and me. Tyler had always been a peripheral figure in his life, someone who showed up sometimes, so when Tyler stopped showing up, Mason simply continued playing, laughing, being a kid, and seeing my youngest son not traumatized, not scared, not anxious, was one of the greatest blessings of my life. But Tyler didn't take it well. Not well at all. He started stalking me in ways that bordered on harassment. Would show up at the apartment without warning I hadn't given him the address, but he found out. Would knock on the door at 11 at night. Would send 47 messages in a row. Would call from different numbers when I blocked him. The messages oscillated between begging and threat. Baby, please, come back. I can't live without you. I need you. The boys need their father. And then, you're going to regret this. You think you can make it alone? You think anyone's going to want you with 3 kids? And then, I'm going to do something to myself if you don't come back. It'll be your fault. And for a brief and pathetic second, I felt guilty, because he was suffering, right? He was desperate, and I'd been taught my whole life that a good wife, a good Christian, stays no matter what. You stay and endure and pray and wait for God to perform the miracle. You don't give up. You don't abandon. But this Chimi, I didn't go back. For the first time in 15 years, I chose my peace instead of his guilt. I blocked the numbers, didn't respond to messages. When he showed up at the door, I didn't open it. And when he started using the children interrogating Jake and Lily about where I went, who I talked to, I reduced the visits, said he could only see the boys in public places, parks, McDonald's, places where I could keep an eye on things. And it was around this time that I went back to therapy for real. Not those sporadic sessions where I'd go once and quit, but real therapy. Every week, sometimes twice a week, with a therapist who didn't accept my excuses, who forced me to face truths I'd avoided for years. Madison, you didn't fail at marriage, she said in one session. The marriage never really existed. You can't fail at something that never had the right ingredients to work. He was never a partner. He was never a companion. He was a drug addict who used you as a safety net. And hearing that someone validate what I'd always felt but never admitted was liberating and painful at the same time, because it meant I'd wasted 15 years. But it also meant it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't failed, that there was nothing I could have done differently that would have changed the outcome. I started taking care of myself again, started working out, nothing intense at first, just walks in the park with the boys, then jogging, then the gym, and slowly, very slowly, my body started to recover. The 20 pounds I'd lost came back not all at once, but gradually. My hair stopped falling out in handfuls in the shower. The dark circles diminished. My skin regained color, and when I looked at myself in the mirror in the morning, I started to recognize the person reflected. It wasn't that broken, scared woman anymore, with no life in her eyes. It was someone new, someone stronger, but not everything was linear. Recovery never is. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, hugging my pillow, feeling that loneliness that physically hurts. There were days I wanted to call Tyler just to hear his voice, just to not feel so completely alone in the world. There were moments I questioned if I'd done the right thing, because loneliness is hard. And even bad company sometimes seems better than no company, especially at 3 in the morning when you wake up and the house is too quiet. But then I'd look at my children, Jake studying peacefully at the kitchen table, without jumping every time the door opened. Lily loving, really laughing, not that nervous laugh she had before watching her favorite show on the couch. Mason sleeping peacefully in his little room without nightmares. And I realized they were okay, better than they'd ever been. And if they were okay, I was going to be okay too. Eventually, 6 months after the separation, something unexpected happened. I started opening myself up to the possibility of meeting other people. Not necessarily to date, I wasn't ready for that, not by a long shot, but just to remember that there were men in the world who weren't like Tyler. Men who actually worked and showed up when they said they would. Men who didn't disappear for days, who didn't use drugs, who treated women with basic respect and decency. I started going out again. Nothing elaborate casual dinners with friends. Happy hours. A date here or there that never went past the first one because I'd panic and make up an excuse. But at least I was trying. At least that voice in my head, Tyler's voice saying no one else is going to want you. You have 3 kids. Your damaged goods started to quiet down. Because it wasn't about someone wanting me. I was finally understanding that. It wasn't about proving Tyler wrong. It wasn't about replacing him. It was about me wanting myself. About me liking who I was, about me believing I deserved good things. And for the first time since I was 16 years old, since that night at the church event when Tyler noticed me, I was starting to like the person I saw in the mirror. A year after the separation, Tyler finally stopped stalking me. Not because he'd gotten over it, Tyler would never get over it, because narcissists don't get over losing control, but because he'd found someone else, someone new to manipulate, someone new to use as an emotional and financial safety net. And when I found out about this, through Jake, who'd seen photos on Instagram, I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel angry. I felt pity. Pity for her. Pity for the woman who was about to live what I'd lived. But it wasn't my problem. Not anymore. My problem now was rebuilding my life, brick by brick. It was paying bills alone, and I could, because I'd always been the main breadwinner, even when I pretended we were a team. It was raising my 3 children alone, and I could, because I'd always done this just now without the extra weight of also taking care of a man-child addict. It was learning to be happy again. And that, I discovered, was the hardest part, because happiness, after so much suffering, feels wrong, feels like you don't deserve it. Feels like at any moment the floor is going to open up and you're going to fall again. Feels presumptuous, risky, like tempting fate. So you sabotage yourself. You create problems where there are none. You anticipate disasters because being prepared for pain is safer than allowing yourself unprotected joy. But I was learning to trust myself, to trust that I'd made the right choice, to trust that better days weren't just possible, they were already here. In Jake bringing home a report card with excellent grades, in Lily asking me to make pancakes on Sunday, in Mason running to hug me when I got back from work. In the small moments of peace that accumulated and transformed into a life. And then, 2 years after leaving that house, something happened that closed that chapter of my life in a definitive and unexpected way. I was in line at Whole Foods with Mason. He wanted to choose cereal when I saw Tyler. He was on the other side of the store, in the organic produce section, with a woman I didn't know. She was pregnant, very pregnant. 7, 8 months. Easy. My first thought wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even surprise, because of course he'd gotten someone else pregnant. Tyler had always been irresponsible like that. My first thought, crystal clear and certain, was, thank God it's not me anymore. Thank God I'm not the one pregnant and alone and being abandoned in hospitals. Thank God I'm not the one waiting for him to come home drunk at dawn. Thank God I escaped. He saw me. Our eyes met over the granola shelves. And for a second, just a second, I saw in him what I think he'd always been, a lost man. A boy who never grew up, someone who never knew how to be happy, so spent his whole life destroying the happiness of those around him. And I felt something I never thought I'd feel. Pity. Not that pity that makes you want to go back and save, but that distant, impersonal pity, the kind you feel for a stranger in a sad news story. Because he was a stranger now. That man I'd loved or thought I loved, or needed to believe I loved, no longer existed in my life. He was just the biological father of my children, someone I had to tolerate at birthdays and graduations, but no longer someone who had power over me, no longer someone who could make me cry with a word or destroy me with a silence, no longer someone who mattered. Mason tugged my hand, bringing me back. Mommy, can we get the chocolate cereal? And I smelled a real smile, not forced, looked at my son, and said, sure, baby, let's get to Boxers. And we left there, put the groceries in the car, went back home, and Tyler stayed behind, literally and figuratively. And it was okay. It was more than okay. It was perfect. Today, at 31 years old, I have a life I never thought would be possible. It's not perfect, far from it. I still have bills to pay that sometimes keep me awake at night doing math, still have difficult moments where anxiety comes back and I have to sit and breathe and remember that I'm safe now, still have scars, emotional and some physical, that probably will never completely heal. But it's my life, and it's good. It's real. It's honest. Jake is 15 now, and he's an incredible young man, sensitive, kind, emotionally aware in a way I never was at his age. He decided on his own that he doesn't want to see his father anymore, and I respect that, because he saw everything. He grew up in that chaos. He has the right to choose who he wants in his life, and if that choice doesn't include Tyler, I understand perfectly and support completely. Lily, at 13, still visits her father sometimes, every 2 weeks, for a few hours, not because she really wants to, but because she feels she should. She has that sense of responsibility I recognize so well in myself, and I'm working with her in therapy. She also does therapize, so she understands that it's not her obligation to carry his guilt or pain, that she can love her father from a distance or not love him, and both are valid. It's a lesson that took me 15 years to learn. I hope she learns it sooner. And Mason, my little one, at 4 years old, he's pure light, pure joy. He doesn't carry the traumas the older siblings carry, because he was born at the end of it all. He only knows the version of me that's healing, that's happy, that wakes up in a good mood and makes pancakes on Sunday and sings in the car and laughs, really loves. And that, for me, is the greatest victory, because I broke the cycle for him. He's not going to grow up thinking relationships are chaos, That love is pain, that you have to sacrifice yourself until there's nothing left. He's going to grow up seeing a strong mother, imperfect, but strong. I went back to church, but in a completely different way. Not with that suffocating guilt from before, not with that pressure to be the perfect wife who saves her lost husband through prayer and submission, but with gratitude, genuine gratitude for having survived. Gratitude for the strength I found not in God performing an external miracle and transforming Tyla, but in God giving me internal courage to save myself and my children. And about romantic relationships, I'm learning slowly. Very slowly. I've gone out a few times with people in the last 2 years. Nothing serious yet. A nice guy I met at the gym, we went out 3 times before he accepted a job in another city. A teacher from Jake's school, we had dinner twice before I panicked and canceled everything. Nothing that went beyond a few dates. Because I'm still learning what's healthy, what real love is versus dependence, what partnership is versus codependence, red flags versus personal preferences. I still have to remind myself that not every man who arrives 10 minutes late is drunk at some bar. That not every man who doesn't respond to messages immediately is cheating on me. That not every conflict means the relationship is ending. But more importantly, I'm learning that I don't need anyone to be complete, that I'm enough alone. That me and my children are a complete and functional and happy family, even without a man in the equation. And if someday someone nice shows up, someone kind, stable, emotionally available, but if they don't, I'm okay too. Better alone and at peace than accompanied and at war. Because for the first time in my life, for the first time since that night at the church event at 15 years old, I chose myself. I chose my peace instead of others' approval. I chose my sanity instead of saving someone who didn't want to be saved. I chose my children instead of a man who never chose us. And that choice, that single choice after 15 years of wrong choices, freed me in a way I never imagined possible. There's a phrase my therapist told me, back at the beginning, that I repeat to myself every time guilt or doubt try to come back. She said, "Madison, you didn't fail at marriage. The marriage never really existed. You can't fail at something that never had the right ingredients to work. You survived, and survival, after everything you went through, isn't failure, it's victory." And she was right. I didn't fail. I survived. And surviving 15 years of emotional abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, betrayal, abandonment, and coming out the other side, not just alive, but rebuilding a good life is a victory, a hell of a victory. So if you're reading this, or listening, or watching and you're in a relationship that destroys you, that diminishes you, that makes you question your sanities, I want you to know some things. Things I wish someone had told me at 16, at 20, at 25 years old. First, it's not your fault. No matter what he says, no matter what your family says, no matter what the church says, you're not responsible for saving anyone. You're not responsible for his happiness. You're not obligated to stay and suffer just because one day you said "I do" or had children with him, or because God hates divorce. God also hates abuse, remember that? Second, you can leave. I know that it seems impossible. I know you look at your life and think, how am I going to pay rent alone? How am I going to raise my kids without help? How am I going to survive alone? But you will. The same way I did. The same way millions of other women did. You're stronger than you think, much stronger. That strength is inside there, waiting. You just need to decide to use it. Third, ask for help. Please. I know it's hard. I know you're ashamed. I know you don't want anyone to know how bad things are. But shame keeps you trapped. Silence kills, literally and figuratively, so speak. Tell a friend, a family member, a therapist, a pastor or priest who understands abuse. Someone, because you can't do this alone. No one can. I only managed to leave because Brooke grabbed my hand and literally dragged me when I didn't have the strength to walk alone. Fourth, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot. Before it gets better, it'll probably get worse. You're going to have nights crying. You're going to question your decision 1,000 times. You're going to miss not him necessarily, but the idea of not being alone. And that's okay. Pain is part of healing. You don't come out of years of trauma without some scars, but scars are proof you survived. They're war medals. Wear them with pride. And fifth, you will be happy again. I promise. Not tomorrow. Not next week, but gradually, one day at a time, you're going to wake up and realize you didn't think about him all morning. That you laughed for real. That you looked at yourself in the mirror and liked what you saw. That you single quotes okay? And those small moments are going to accumulate like drops filling a cup until they become a whole lifetime of peace. I don't know who you are. I don't know your name, your specific story, your exact circumstances. But if any part of what I shared here resonated with you, if you saw yourself in me, in the 16-year-old Madison who clung to the first man who paid attention to her, or in the 25-year-old Madison who believed prayer would fix everything, or in the 29-year-old Madison who was literally dying but couldn't leave, please choose yourself. Choose your peace instead of his guilt. Choose your children, if you have them, because they deserve to see a strong and happy mother, not a broken and scared one. Choose the life you deserve instead of the life you think you have to endure out of obligation, out of shame, out of fear, or because of that lie everyone tells that family has to stay together no matter what, because the door is there. It might be heavy. It might be locked with several bolts. It might seem completely impossible to open. But the key has always been in your hand from the beginning. You just need to have the courage to use it, courage to turn the knob, courage to push, courage to cross the threshold and never look back. And if I'm Madison Harper, the girl who got pregnant at 16, who was emotionally beaten for 15 years, who almost died in a delivery room completely alone, who lost 20 pounds from anxiety, who had panic attacks so strong she thought she was having a heart attack, I managed to open that door and build a beautiful and peaceful life on the other side. Believe me, you can too. Life is waiting for you. The happy version of you is waiting for you. Your children, if you have them, need to see you strong, not destroyed. And you deserve more. Much, much more than crumbs of affection. More than empty promises. More than living in constant fear or sadness or loneliness inside your own marriage. So take a deep breath, pick up the phone, call that friend who's always offered help. Schedule that appointment with the therapist. Open that secret bank account. Save that money, even if it's $5 a week. Make that plan, even if it seems impossible. And when the time comes, and you will know when it's time, your body will tell you get up. You grab your things and your children's things, and you go, and never, never, never look back. Because you deserve a life where you don't go to sleep afraid, where you don't wake up checking messages with your heart racing, where you don't have to explain bruises or justify absences or make up excuses. You deserve peace. You deserve joy. You deserve to live, not just survive. And if no one else tells you this today, I believe in you. I believe you can do it. I believe you will. And when you finally cross that door and close it behind you, I'll be here on the other side, along with millions of other women who did the same, waiting with open arms to tell you, welcome home, you did it, you're safe now. And the good life, it starts now.